It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The alleged plot to kidnap and murder TV presenter Holly Willoughby. A man has appeared in court.
We're obviously all shocked to hear the news, and we want to send our love and biggest hugs to Holly.
Gavin Plumb is accused of assembling a kidnap and restraint kit and encouraging someone to travel to the UK. Also tonight, Labour dare to dream after an emphatic by-election win over the SNP in Scotland. Iran's most prominent human rights activist is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize as she serves 10 years behind bars.
Trying to come to terms with losing my dad, and now I was having my mum ripped out of my arms in nighty dressing gowns and slippers.
Arrested for murder for the mercy killing of her husband. But would new guidance published this week have made a difference? And
so this is one of our test bedrooms where we release live bed bugs.
Why the cost of living crisis and climate change could be to blame for more bedbug infestations. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. TV presenter Holly Willoughby is being provided with round-the-clock security tonight after a man was charged over an alleged plot to kidnap and murder her. 36-year-old Gavin Plumb is accused of planning to assemble a kidnap and restraint kit and encouraging someone to travel to the UK to carry out his scheme. Emma Birchley reports.
In court on his way to prison, the man accused of plotting to murder and kidnap ITV star Holly Willoughby. Friday's edition of This Morning began with confirmation that the show's star presenter had been the target of the alleged plot.
We're not going to talk too much about it, but we have to start with a story about one of our own. Holly is on the front pages this morning after police arrested a 36-year-old man over an alleged kidnap plot. He's now been charged by Essex Police.
We're obviously all shocked to hear the news, and we want to send our love and biggest hugs to Holly.
As a guest on the sofa, even the Prime Minister had words of support.
Sorry to hear about everything going on with Holly. So I just wanted to send my best to her and her family and to all of you.
Appreciate that.
Holly had failed to appear on air on Thursday. Essex Police later revealed they'd arrested a 36-year-old man at his home in Harlow the day before. Then, on Friday morning, it was announced he'd been charged. Gavin Plumb from Potter's Field in Harlow appeared in Court 1 at Chelmsford Magistrates in a baggy green T-shirt to face charges of soliciting a third party to commit murder and incitement to commit kidnap. After confirming his identity, he sat with his head bowed before being remanded in custody by the district judge. The charges detailed how the shopping centre security officer encouraged that third party to travel to the UK to carry out the plan and assemble a kidnap and restraint kit. In a statement, Detective Superintendent Rob Kirby from Essex Police said, "This was an extremely fast-paced investigation, with many of our officers and national partners working overnight to secure these charges. The safeguarding of any victim is paramount, and we will continue to prioritise this as the investigation proceeds." Gavin Plumb will appear at Chelmsford Crown Court on November the 3rd, where he'll have the chance to enter a plea. In the meantime, a spokesperson for ITV has said it's supporting Holly and her family at what was an incredibly distressing time. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
The Labour leader boasted today that his party blew the door off to defeat the SNP in a crucial by-election in Scotland. His new MP won with nearly 18,000 votes in what Sir Keir Starmer described as the first step in a very important journey. He hopes, of course, that the path will lead directly to Downing Street, as Sky's Scotland correspondent Conor Gillies reports.
A spring in his step.
Welcome to Scotland's newest MP, Michael Shanks!
Winning ways for a party plotting a path to number 10.
Keir Starmer.
His party enjoying a major 20% swing away from the SNP in a contest with low turnout.
This is a sight the Labour Party has not seen in Scotland for very many years. A taste of success once again after a near electoral wipeout in the wake of the Scottish independence referendum in 2014.
I've always said the route to that general election runs through Scotland, and that is because I know how strongly so many people in Scotland want change.
This was a protest vote, wasn't it?
No, this was a very positive vote for Labour.
Starmer may be enjoying the party. Conservative voter Hazel switched to Labour.
So you're glad that Labour have won?
Yeah. Oh yes. The mistakes Labour made the last time they were in power put me off, but everyone deserves a second chance. I did vote SNP, but I was very, very torn. It's hard to put a positive spin on that result, and I can understand why people are looking elsewhere at this time.
The SNP has been bogged down in a police probe over their finances. A once dominant movement now recognising it cannot be business as usual.
We've got to reflect, I've got to reflect, the party has to ensure we've got a good campaign machine behind us, but also that we're inspiring people with a message.
This is what scares the SNP. Predictions Labour could secure more than 40 seats in Scotland.
If anybody inside the SNP thought that, well, maybe the polls were exaggerating their difficulties, any such thoughts should now be dispelled. The SNP have to work out how to repel this Labour advance.
The road to Rutherglen was a tale of two tests. Humza Yousaf's leadership, Labour's talk of a resurgence. The political wind changes fast. All is still to play for. Conor Gillis, Sky News, South Lanarkshire.
The man who is second in command at European football's governing body, UEFA, has stepped down from one of his roles after Sky News revealed he voted to end Russia's ban from European football. Carl-Erik Nielsen initially tried to deny the report from Sky's sports correspondent Rob Harris. Well, Rob's with me now in the studio. And Rob, he's a senior figure in European football. Remind us of how we find ourselves at this point in the story tonight.
Well, it was a week and a half ago that European football's governing body took a surprise decision to relax its blanket ban on all Russian teams taking part in European football to allow the under-17s potentially back into competitions. And I investigated how that vote unfolded. The British members, unsurprisingly, voted against Russia's return. But then I uncovered that the most senior vice president in UEFA, Carl-Erik Nielsen, voted in favour of Russia's return. And that put him into direct conflict with his role in Sweden as head of the umbrella sports organisation, which is against Russia taking part in international sport. That led to Mr Nielsen putting out a statement saying he didn't recognise the description of the vote as described by ourselves at Sky, and he was misrepresenting his position. Days later, he did say he was sorry over how his vote was being viewed, but even then he misrepresented how UEFA took its decision. He implied it wasn't a final decision and that UEFA was still investigating Russia's potential return. That led to growing pressure in Sweden, with many looking at our reporting of that vote, with emergency meetings through the week. And then today, Carl-Erik Nielsen announced his resignation after barely 4 months as head of the Sports Confederation in Sweden. And he said that trust has been affected in me and Swedish sport, and he talked about hatred and personal attacks. But it's led to quite an outcry in Sweden, and they've reasserted their position that they're against Russia being in international sport. And this is a huge issue across the global game, because FIFA this week also, as I uncovered, have decided to relax their ban on Russia to also allow their under-17s back into football. And there's more to come from this, because England are amongst those nations that have said they will boycott any match against Russia, and Ukraine wants a complete boycott too.
OK, Rob, thank you very much for that update on that story. She is Iran's most prominent human rights activist and also an inmate in the country's notorious Evin prison. But even from behind bars, Nagaz Mohammadi has remained an outspoken critic of Iran's government. Today, she was awarded the 2023 Nobel Peace Prize for her support of women's rights in what her family described as an historic and profound moment. Sahazand reports.
Burn the cage and free the birds, she sings. The dawn of freedom is near. Nagaz Mohammadi has lost her career, family and freedom in her fight for change in Iran. But even from the darkest cells of the notorious Evin prison in Tehran, the 51-year-old human rights activist fearlessly continues her path. And this is what has led to her receiving this year's Nobel Peace Prize.
To Narges Mohammadi for her fight against the oppression of women in Iran and her fight to promote human rights and freedom for all.
Over the past 30 years, Mohammadi has fought against government repression, campaigned for women's rights and the abolition of the death penalty. While many Iranians celebrate the award, a 16-year-old girl has been in a coma, guarded by security agents in the intensive care unit of a military hospital in Tehran. Armita Garavand entered a subway car in Tehran early Sunday on her way to school. Minutes later, she was dragged out unconscious and laid on the train platform. This has evoked broad comparisons with Mahsa Amini, who died last year at 22 in the custody of the morality police after being accused of violating Iran's hijab rules. Her death led to the biggest nationwide protests across the country in decades, in which the brutal crackdown by the authorities left 500 killed and over 22,000 arrested. Since then, Narges has lent her powerful voice to the victims and their families, finding ways to publicize the abuse inside prisons.
I hope that this award will lead to Narges Mohammadi's freedom and the freedom of other political prisoners.
Shirin Ebadi is a UK-based Iranian human rights lawyer and activist, and Mohammadi's longtime mentor and colleague, who also won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2003 for her own activism.
The message that this award sends to the Islamic Republic is that the world is watching you. Stop violating the human rights and harassment of your own people.
Do you think that could lead to any change?
I hope it does, but it's too soon to tell.
Sahar Zand, Sky News.
Some of the other stories making the news today now, and a 74-year-old man has pleaded not guilty to the murder of PC Sharon Beshenivsky, who was shot while responding to a robbery in Bradford 18 years ago. PC Beshenivsky had only been in the role for 9 months when she was killed. Pirandita Khan was extradited from Pakistan and will face trial in February. Despite only ever holding a single seat in Parliament, the Green Party has insisted that it can quadruple that figure at the next general election. As the Green Party conference got underway in Brighton, co-leader Adrian Ramsey told Sky News he's looking to build on the growth in the number of Green councillors. He also revealed the party's campaign with a focus on affordable housing.
We're putting forward a package of proposals that will ensure that people have homes that are affordable to rent and to buy, and homes that are affordable to heat. And there's a range of ways that we can pay for this. The Green Party is alone in saying that the very richest in society, the super multimillionaires and billionaires, should pay a little bit more in tax. Even a modest amount more on their assets could raise billions of pounds that we can invest in things like grants to people to be able to insulate their homes, which will keep bills down, keep their homes warm, and measures like building new social housing that we desperately need across the country.
Canadian rap star Drake, Drake has announced he will take a break from making music. The multi-Grammy winner says he's been suffering from the craziest stomach problems for years and will take a step back for a year or so to focus on his health. The shock announcement comes as the musician released his latest album. To the Balkans now, and the fragile peace which is under threat after a clash between Kosovo police and Serbian fighters. Tensions have been brewing since the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Almost everyone in Kosovo is ethnically Albanian, though in some areas ethnic Serbs make up the majority. In the largest northern city, Mitrovica, it's split down the middle. Europe is now on high alert, and British troops have been sent in after that lethal gunfight in the village of Banjska almost 2 weeks ago. From there, our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, sent this report.
In the mountains above the village of Banjska, which was stormed by ethnic Serb gunmen, police are still gathering intelligence. The clash, which left one officer dead, has caused seismic shockwaves and raised the spectre that another war may not be far away.
The situation here remains extraordinarily tense. There is a real fear that there could be another eruption of violence. Now, the Kosovan police are conducting more patrols in this area. These are the tracks, or some of the tracks, that the militants used to escape across the border to Serbia. And what their aim is to reassert their control here.
Down below, investigations and the removal of the trucks used by the gunmen to barricade the village continue. Police say they now have much evidence.
It's a military weapon. It's mortars, 82 millimeters, 60 millimeters. They're not used by the police, or at least we don't have them. So that itself shows the scale of the attack that happened on us.
This drone footage, released by the authorities, shows how the masked ethnic Serb paramilitaries moved through the mountains with heavy weapons supported by armoured vehicles. The Kosovo government claims the attack was a terrorist act sponsored by Belgrade with the aim of destabilising the state.
They deny because they are playing with Putin's playbook in Donbass, little green men in northern part of Kosovo, who wanted to start a war and divide Kosovo.
The peace in Kosovo is fragile, a complex patchwork of ethnicities and divided communities. In Mitrovica, the city is split. Kosovan Albanians on one side and Serbs on the other. People are worried where all this is leading.
We don't want war or something else. We just want to be calm here. We need peace and something like that.
But you're worried?
Oh, big worried.
It's not easy to know that we cannot freely go in the north side. We know that it's our place, we know that it's our city, but because of the tensions and because that we are afraid that something can happen to us.
Kosovo declared independence in 2008 after a bloody war in the late 90s. But it's never been recognised by Serbia or most of the minority Serb population living within its borders. In Belgrade, there have been angry denials that they were involved in the uprising. The president claims the Kosovan government's nationalist policies are to blame for the crisis.
I can understand, everybody can understand, because those people were mainly expelled from their thresholds. Many of them were shot by Kosovo police, even kids, 11 years old, and no one was held accountable for that.
What is clear is that peace here cannot be taken for granted. Additional British troops are on their way to join the NATO-led international peacekeeping force already on the ground. They will have their work cut out. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Pristina.
It's the new guidance which campaigners hope will mean that compassionate assistance to die will not be prosecuted. But today, one woman whose mother was charged with her husband's death told Sky News that mercy killings must now be defined in law. Ivor Bennett reports.
It's the tragic case of Mavis and Dennis Eccleston that's triggered these changes. Inseparable for 60 years, they made a suicide pact that went wrong. When Dennis could no longer bear the pain of incurable bowel cancer, Mavis helped him take an overdose and tried to end her life too. But while he died, she survived and was charged with his murder.
Dad wants me to look into Dignitas and he said no. He said you can't.
Their daughter Joy was at her mother's hospital bedside when the police came.
Not even 24 hours before, I'd just lost my dad. So I was trying to come to terms with losing my dad, and now I was having my mum ripped out of my arms in nighty dressing gown and slippers and put in a police cell for 30 hours. It literally was as somebody had set a bomb off in our lives, and so we didn't get any chance to grieve Dad, and I've never grieved him since.
Mavis was eventually acquitted by a jury, but only after the trauma of a trial, something campaigners believe would now be avoided. The new guidance on mercy killings states charges would be likely where a suspect influenced a victim not to seek medical treatment, and where the suspect was a healthcare professional with the victim in their care. But it says charges are unlikely where the victim had made a voluntary, clear, settled and informed decision to die, and whether suspects' actions were reluctant under emotional pressure to assist.
It's clearly trying to mitigate the cruelty of the current law. It's distinguishing between malicious homicide and compassionate assistance to die. So what the Crown Prosecution Service is saying, effectively, is that compassionate assistance to die shouldn't be prosecuted.
But this new guidance is just that, it's guidance. Mercy killings are still not defined in law, and it's not a defence against murder or manslaughter. So while campaigners welcome these changes, they're still calling on MPs to do more and to bring in new legislation to enable assisted dying.
Without it, they fear people will still turn to family members because they have no other choice. But there are groups who fiercely oppose any changes, as well as the new guidance.
They're clearly open to abuse because how do you know that the consent given was fully informed consent and not influenced by something like a mental health condition such as depression or some sort of coercion that you're unaware of?
So despite the changes, it's an issue that will remain deeply divisive and extremely distressing for those it affects. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
To the insects described as invisible hitchhikers, bedbugs. You may have heard a lot about them this past week after infestations in Paris. Here, one pest control company has seen a 10% increase in call-outs because of cramped housing and mutations. So how do you spot them and stop them? Rachel Venables has been finding out.
Your worst nightmare.
How bad is this infestation?
This is quite a bad one.
How many bedbugs are there in here?
Quite a few.
Hundreds?
Hundreds. Yeah, you can see the small babies, they're all in there. There's literally about over 100 actually inside there now.
Just on that tape?
Just on that tape.
At this house in Croydon, Tyrell's been called in to tackle a bedbug infestation that's growing out of control.
Ooh.
Partly digested blood. This is quite a bad infestation.
And they were all in here feeding on whoever was
Whoever's in here, they would have been feeding on them, yeah, for a long, long time.
The job keeps him busy. In the past year, his company's seen a 10% rise in bedbug reports and a 17% jump in just the last month.
That could be because people are travelling more at the moment and bringing them home. Another reason is that people haven't got as much disposable income now, so they might be putting up with bedbugs, and of course if they do that, they can then spread to neighbouring premises, etc.
A national panic in France might also be behind the surge in call-outs here. The government's played down reports of outbreaks in Paris and Marseille, but top officials met on Friday to come up with an action plan. While in Algeria, borders are being tightened with extra health screening to catch any travelling bugs.
So this is one of our test bedrooms where we release live bed bugs.
Dr. Richard Naylor's been studying the creatures for more than 20 years.
In Paris, it's become a political thing, and there's a media frenzy around that. And so I think that gives the false impression that Paris has a worse problem than anywhere else. But I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that Paris is any worse than London. So I think if you're travelling from London to Paris, you're equally likely to take bugs with you as bring them away again.
While some think these reports of a rise in bedbugs are overblown, there's no doubt how easy these insects are to pick up.
Looking nice and chubby now, full of blood.
And how devilishly difficult they then are to eradicate. Rachel Venables, Sky News.
Simone Biles has become the most decorated gymnast in history after winning the individual all-round title at the World Championships for the 6th time. She's been dominating the sport ever since she returned after a 2-year break, which she took because of her mental health. She'd already made history early this week when she became the first woman to land a highly complicated vault routine, which has now been renamed in her honour. She now has 34 global medals, more than any other gymnast, male or female. Congratulations to her. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. Welcome to you both. Amongst those front pages, this story on the front of the Express about an alleged plot to kidnap and murder television presenter Holly Willoughby. We'll be right back with that story, and others. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. A man has been charged over an alleged plot to kidnap and murder the TV presenter Holly Willoughby. Sir Keir Starmer has hailed an historic result in Scotland after his party overwhelmingly won the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. The jailed Iranian women's rights activist Narges Mohammadi has won this year's Nobel Peace Prize. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the PR consultant Alex Dean. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Express leads with the story of the man charged with an alleged plot to kidnap and murder television presenter Holly Willoughby. That court appearance is also the lead item on the front of tomorrow's Daily Mirror. The Sun, too, makes it the top story. After its victory in the Rutherglen by-election, the Eye reports on what it says is a plan by Labour, if it wins power, to solve the UK housing crisis by taxing developers to fund more social housing and build new towns alongside the country's rail network. The new homes plan is also the top story in The Guardian. Labour policies also make the top story in The Times, with the Shadow Health Secretary saying that the NHS must modernise or die, and outlining plans to double the number of diagnostic scanners in hospitals. The death of the wife of former Manchester United football manager Sir Alex Ferguson is lead story in the Daily Star. The Telegraph reports that hundreds of rape suspects have been wrongly labelled by police as women after they declared that to be their gender when arrested. Menopause madness. The Mail claims an exclusive with news that dozens of public bodies and universities have what it calls male menopause policies, another example of what critics say is wokeism. And the Financial Times reports on moves to help the cash-strapped Metro Bank solve its problem with a massive cash injection from a group of its bondholders. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Zoe Williams and Alex Dean. Welcome to you both. I'm slightly losing my voice there. Let's start with the front of the FT and really the story is whether Labour are preparing for general election. We know that they are, but are they further along the road to a potential victory following that result of the by-election in Rutherglen that we saw last night? Alex.
So John Curtis on the front of the FT gives the usual caveats we get from pollsters, that you shouldn't read too much into a single by-election and that turnout is low. But the government will be concerned, I think, for three reasons. The first is the sheer size of the Labour victory, undeniable, and indicates that Labour is recovering in Scotland, which is vital if it's going to return to number 10. Second reason for the government to be concerned is that it looks like a heavy dose of tactical voting. Doesn't just force the Tories so low they lose their deposit, but it really inflates the Labour's lead over the SNP much more than people were expecting. We can make points about the person who'd been the incumbent, had broken COVID rules and hadn't been around for 3 years and so forth. Sure, that's a factor, but the sheer size of it, plus tactical voting, indicates a problem for the government. And the third is tucked away at the end of this story in the FT, which isn't about the by-election itself, it's about the national position. YouGov has a poll out that shows that the Conservative Party didn't get a bump from conference. Normally, you'd expect some kind of positivity after you think your conference has gone well, the Prime Minister's delivered a speech, he's had wall-to-wall coverage from his announcements, no real impact, it seems, in the electorate.
I mean, it's amazing after that conference that it didn't have more of an electorate and take their numbers down, I think, because there was very little in that anybody was cheering, even in the conference hall, it seemed to me.
So I thought that I disagree with some of it. I'm a Liberal and I wouldn't ban smoking, but it's undeniably popular. That got huge coverage. It's a sort of 80-20 issue. 80% of people sort of agree with it.
Yeah, but the thing is that it didn't. It's a very minor thing, isn't it? It's a bit of a weird policy to make something illegal for people of some ages and not illegal for other ages.
Creates two classes of adults.
Exactly. It's really weird. And B, people are looking at the kind of problems of the nation and they are not thinking this is all going to be solved by some children who are currently only 14 never being allowed to smoke. They're just not thinking that. And nothing apart from HS2 in Rishi Sunak's speech actually looked like it would address anything. And the HS2 announcement, of course, is very unpopular. So I'm surprised. I think they should be happy that their numbers have remained where they are. But I think on the by-election, I mean, maybe I'm seeing this too positively from a Labour point of view. But, 3 years ago, the SNP's hold on Scotland was absolutely unassailable. And all the conversations that were happening in Labour circles were, how do you build a majority forgetting Scotland? It was just understood that Labour had lost Scotland. And part of that was that precipitous drop from being the party that everybody voted for to being the party that nobody voted for, which was 2015, right?
Yeah.
So you had this extraordinary situation, which, because it was so stark, everybody thought was going to last forever. But in fact, the SNP looks to be a busted flush at the moment. You know, nobody knows what is true about the allegations. No, they don't have time to concentrate on their politics. They've lost Nicola Sturgeon, who was a kind of very popular and quite uniting leader. Nobody knows what to make of them.
So is it more because of the SNP's failings rather than the success of Labour?
I think the Labour... it doesn't...
Well, I think there's two factors. One, it's clearly the collapse in the SNP has, and their leadership has been a big piece of it. But secondly, whilst I wouldn't vote for Keir Starmer personally, he's plainly not Jeremy Corbyn. He's plainly more electable, he's plainly more emollient, and I think he goes down a lot better north of the border, just as he does south.
Yeah, I mean, Corbyn... It's funny, Corbyn in Scotland, but
It just didn't work, right?
It didn't work. But I think part of the reason it didn't work, sorry, I would say this, but part of the reason it didn't work is because a lot of that progressive energy, a lot of the anti-authoritarianism, anti-Westminster, leftist, kind of hard-left energy had been marshalled by the referendum campaign and rolled into the SNP. Now, that was completely illogical because the SNP used to be known as the Totten Tories. They were never a left-wing party prior to the referendum bounce. But the referendum really turned them into the party of socialism, even if they weren't at. Yeah. And so there really wasn't any space for Corbyn to play. And I think that's why he didn't really ignite in Scotland. The reasons he didn't ignite in England were different.
Just make one.
But, you know, I spend my life trying to get a little bit more texture into the Corbyn was electoral poison story, which I don't think is quite right.
No, broadly true, though. Just a final point on the...
Well, he's not Prime Minister, so...
That's for sure. Final point on the by-election for me. Whilst, of course, I want the Conservative Party's fortunes to recover north of the border, and I would like them to be the majority party, I, as a unionist, rejoice when the SNP does badly. And I think it's a good thing when Labour overtakes the SNP. I want to see the fight in Scotland to be between the two parties of governments rather than between a party that pursued this really bizarre, quixotic agenda. And that's before they tried to send a male rapist to a female prison. I mean, their agenda on nationalism, which was the answer and tonic to all things, I am very glad that they have really... people have said the Emperor's got no clothes.
I mean, I don't think that is what people have said, but I do think there's an argument...
Well, are the SNP continuing on that trajectory?
Well, on the trajectory of wanting a referendum. I think if the SNP survives, they will want a referendum, but I just don't think they've got the energy to kind of press for that at the moment. And you know, the thing with a referendum is that what everybody has seen what referenda do to the nation's politics, what kind of these quite abstruse constitutional matters do. Yeah. Everybody has seen what it really feels like when people promise you the earth and say it won't cost anything, and what it feels like when it actually does cost things. And I think maybe the kind of fallout from Brexit has put people off having any kind of referendum, whether they were for or anti.
I think that's fair. But there's also a couple of...
people have had their fill of
they've had enough referendum. Not another one.
I mean, if I just said something really radical...
No, I don't think you have, for people on both sides of the debate. But I also think that the case for independence as presented at the last referendum was underpinned in part because of the oil discussion, which events have rather surpassed, and secondly by the claim of closeness to the European Union, which would admit Scotland as an independent country. And basically the EU has torpedoed that, not least because of Spain.
Well, have they anyway? It's for the birds because I think it's not going to happen. Yeah. But I don't think the EU has torpedoed.
Should we move on?
Should we move on?
We spent a while discussing, quite rightly so.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the Times and their headline after HS2 drama. Prepare to be bored by Starmer. That rhymes. I don't know if it was intentional, but that's a very unfair headline.
It does seem quite unfair. I was quite surprised by that. I was looking for the quote marks and thinking, are they just quoting somebody? And that would make more sense. But to say that as a news headline, Well, I mean, it seems very partisan.
You sort of see the logic, though. If you're doing this well in the polls, play small target. Don't give your opponents things that they can criticise. When Starmer says things that are new on policy, so he took a point on having a more sympathetic position on migration, one that would seek a new arrangement with the European Union and so forth, and got a lot of criticism for it. And I'm sure advisers around him said, look, we're so far ahead, each time you open your mouth on a real big new policy issue, you potentially set us back. Play small target. Hence, after the HS2 drama, prepare to be bored by Starmer.
I mean, well, A, I disagree with that as an argument, and B, I disagree with this as a headline. So in the first place, I mean, Alistair Campbell made quite a useful intervention yesterday. And when he said, it's actually, when you're gearing up for power, it's good to be attacked. It's really, part of becoming real for the electorate is then being able to see who's going after you.
He was suggesting that Sir Keir Starmer isn't doing enough of
exactly,
that, and there needs to be more clear water between Labour and the Conservatives.
But also much more boldness. And you know, I agreed with that from Campbell.
Campbell's not running the Labour Party.
No,
he could come back in 45 minutes.
But you know, the thing with the kind of intern, what's going wrong, I think, and the reason why the Times can kind of get away with being both the paper of record and saying that Starmer's boring before he's even done his conference, is that the Keir Starmer campaign is being run by Blairites who weren't even alive when Blair was running his campaign. So they don't actually remember what that spirit of Blairism was. They think it was kind of caution, third way, triangulation.
Scrapping Clause 4, it was demonstrating change
Alex,
in the party.
you've actually forgotten yourself, and you are a little bit younger than me, so that kind of makes sense. But the truth is that he was an extraordinary optimist. So even if it kind of went a bit curdled by 2003,
Sunshine, win the day.
It was kind of, we can change this country, we can change it radically.
Sure.
It will be a completely different proposition to the Conservatives. You will never know government as different as ours. And there was a huge amount of optimism and hope, which is what is missing from the kind of Labour ranks
Just
now.
very quickly before we move on, Alex, just your thoughts on what some might say is a bit of character assassination of Sir Keir Starmer, that he's always referred to as boring, lacking charisma.
I don't think he is boring, and I think he's plainly a capable politician who, whilst he's not my cup of tea, is a vast improvement on his predecessor. But the point I was going to make was that you can disagree with the argument that Labour should play small target. You can disagree with the argument they should be boring. I don't think you can disagree that there are some who think that and are advising the leadership to do that. They need to keep their heads down, and that's the point about being bored by Starmer. We are likely to see a Labour conference where the agenda, first and foremost, is not to rock the boats.
The Mirror, let's have a look at that. A very jubilant-looking Sir Keir Starmer there. His quote was, you know, blown the doors off, absolutely beyond his wildest dreams. That resulted in the by-election. Zoe?
It's funny, isn't it? Because he's got very blokish language. I mean, he's sort of like making a clear Italian job reference.
Yeah.
Which is...
There are lots of people who won't know what that is.
No, well, yeah, not least half his team, I would think. But, you know, if he's happy, they're happy. I mean, you know, of course he has to say this is massive, and of course he has.
Well, it is though, isn't it?
It is. You know, I mean, this is a seat that Corbyn won in 2017, is it not?
Yes.
So I mean, it's not that massive. It's only a swing from 2019. It's not like a historic.
Labour had it 17-19 SNP for a single term, and of course they had a terrible MP who had to, broke COVID rules, clung desperately on, and that's a factor. But a 20% swing is a 20% swing. You can't deny it.
Yeah, sure. And you know, I mean, it does look realistic to me for them to be talking about a score, at least, of...
north of
the border, which does change the picture dramatically, because the whole calculation for 2017-2019 for Labour was, if we're never going to get those seats back, we need to concentrate on university towns, we need to find a way to get rid of the Lib Dems in the southwest, we need to find this, we need to find that. And so it really changed their strategy. A, it meant it was more important to appeal to younger voters, and B, it meant it was less important to seek a deal with the Lib Dems. Now, if you're going to get at least a portion of your Scottish seats back, then you can really go back to the drawing board on A, what kind of deal you want to do with Ed Davey, and B, what your prospects are in the South East.
Let's move to the Express. Their headline, Surge for Labour, but Jellyfish Starmer faces major battle to reach Downing Street. And what do they mean by that?
There was a joke made in Party I didn't think it was one of his better jokes, actually. It was a joke made by Michael Gove that Keir Starmer was like a jellyfish, see-through and no spine. The conference hall at least applauded. The thing I think is this, that if Labour does well north of the border, as you rightly imply, it makes their life easier, but it's a much bigger swing they need, even than Blair got, to take a majority into number 10. You can foresee lots of scenarios which are played out here in the newspapers and in the Express about different kinds of hung parliaments and perhaps the kind of negotiations, as Zoe was just talking about, with the Liberal Democrats. But the sheer size and scale of the increase that Labour has to have in England, which, let's not forget, whilst it's fashionable to talk about other bits of our great country, has the vast majority of seats in Westminster, the sheer size and scale of their success means that in one heave it's very difficult to do.
But the thing is, sorry.
I was just going to say very quickly before we go to the break, what are your predictions for their conference? Do you think we are going to see a bolder Sir Keir Starmer setting out in no uncertain terms exactly what policies will be?
Well, I think that, you know, the fact that they're drip-feeding a lot on their house-building programme, and there is kind of genuinely new policy in that on where how houses would be built and who would pay for them. So that, you know, there is actual meat on those bones. I always kind of, my heart sinks a bit when I see kind of, we'll build this many houses, because Labour leaders literally always say that, and I've seen the leaders stand up in front of conference for the past 10 years saying that. Well, it doesn't happen because they never get in.
No, on both sides of politics. When you pledge to build 300,000 homes, and no one ever does.
It never happens.
Look,
but that's because Conservatives lie and Labour lose, right? So...
Oh, well,
is that fact?
Well, it has been the story.
One of those is true.
13 years. Yeah. It's true, though.
I don't think you're going to see Starmer swinging big punches at the conference. Indeed, and he doesn't need my advice, but were I advising a candidate this far ahead, I'd say, shut up, get in the cupboard, don't do anything.
But you're not a Labour voter,
that carrying that porcelain vase, drop it.
I just don't think you have a clue why people support Labour when they do support Labour. So if they take your advice...
That's certainly true.
He's not a Labour supporter. On that note, Alex and Zoe, thank you very much for the minute. We are going to take a break. Coming up, is the male menopause real? We'll ask Alex and Zoe when we come back.
Welcome to the Middle East Business Report. These are the top stories from across the region this week. The UAE's clean energy producer Masdar has announced the launch of the country's first wind farms dotted throughout the UAE. The company said that the combined capacity of these wind turbines exceeds 100 megawatts, capable of powering over 23,000 homes. Despite a global rout in digital currency markets, the UAE still saw nearly £28 billion in cryptocurrency transactions over the past year. That's according to a recent report. Crypto firms have flocked to the UAE as the country has strengthened its regulatory framework around digital currencies like Bitcoin. ADNOC has awarded contracts totalling nearly £14 billion for its Hale and Guhassak offshore gas project this week. In an announcement at ADIPEC, the Middle East's largest energy conference, the company said that the contracts would cover engineering, construction and procurement work on the gas field. Riyadh Air, Saudi Arabia's newly established airline, is nearing the conclusion of negotiations for a substantial order of narrow-body aircraft. That's according to the CEO, Tony Douglas. Mr. Douglas said that the deal with Airbus and Boeing had progressed significantly since his last update in June. He hinted at an imminent announcement and indicated that the airline might make further aircraft purchases as it rapidly expands its fleet. An independent committee assessing BP and Abu Dhabi National Oil's joint offer of approximately £1.6 billion for a 50% stake in New Med Energy has urged the two energy giants to significantly raise their bid. BP and ANDOC are now weighing up whether to scrap the bid for the Israeli gas exploration company. That's according to sources. And Saudi Arabia has announced its bid to host the 2034 World Cup this week, shortly after FIFA invited countries from the Asian and Oceanic regions to submit their applications. In a statement, the Saudi Arabian Football Federation said it intends to deliver a world-class tournament and draw inspiration from the country's passion for football.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Zoe Williams and Alex Dean. Let us have a look at the FT weekend, their front page, and the continuing woes of Metro Bank, although there does seem to be some positive news because bondholders contacted the Lenders Board proposing a £600 million capital injection. Explain what's been happening with Metro.
Well, there's a run on the bank, and it shows, I think, that breaking the established hold that the big banks have in the UK is exceptionally difficult. And Metro was basically the closest we got to a challenger bank breaking through to high street presence and dominance and presence at the table. So one of the things worth bearing in mind is whilst you're right that the bondholders have expressed positivity and it looks like there's a bailout plan, one, it depends on selling off a chunk of the mortgage book, so it's going to weaken the bank's position. And two, the share hit that they have taken means that NatWest, HSBC, our traditional big players in the banking sector just look that bit more secure. So if you weren't already if you weren't already an investor, you might think twice. Whatever you think about Metro and its advertising and its positioning, this is a bad day for plurality in the banking sector and for consumer choice.
I mean, was there like a proper run on? Did it look like they were going to be?
Well, they lost between it bounced around fast. They lost between a quarter and a half of their share price at one point.
Wow. Okay. And how much contagion would there be between, you know, if something really... Are they too big to fail?
No.
Or are they small enough to fail?
You're asking the wrong person, because I think most bank bailouts are wrong. But as we've seen in things like Silicon Valley Bank, where people were terrified and then there was an answer pretty quickly and somebody acquired the bank and it had lots of good assets, like Metro Bank does. Right. There are solutions that the market can produce. But and certainly our big established players would be in a very different position to Metro Bank, even if it did suffer. But
to that point about being too big to fail, it's interesting the quote from Gary Greenwood, the analyst at Shore Capital, saying an asset sale would merely kick the can down the road and doesn't address the fundamental issue that the bank is overcosted and lacks scale.
Yeah, and that's the trouble. If you can't get to scale in the UK, it's chicken and egg. So if you were trying to think about starting a new bank now and you looked at what Metro Bank had, you'd think, I'm going to try another market.
But also, I mean, there is a kind of canary in the coal mine angle to it, isn't there? That people will be looking at it and thinking, is this just one challenger bank running into problems, or are we looking at is this the beginning of something?
Let's get to the Mail. We're running out of time, but this story about the male menopause. You're giggling.
No,
but,
I'm just thinking.
The serious question is, does it exist? And you're closing your eyes, Alex.
It obviously doesn't exist. You have to be menstruating and then stop menstruating in order to have the menopause. And what farce have we got to it? It's like a Monty Python sketch about, you know, where are you going to keep the fetus in a box? You have to have the necessary equipment to have the menopause, and men don't. So the fact that dozens of councils and universities, police forces and fire services have male menopause policies mean that the people we trust to run our authorities, teach our young, keep us safe on the streets and put out fires are all led, at least in part, by lunatics.
I just think this is so daft, right? You know, we have this, it's almost daily. A paper like the Mail or the Express, it's usually them, sometimes it's even the Times. They find this ridiculous straw man. They go absolutely crazy about it. These are probably like footnotes in a manual on how to manage menopause symptoms, with somebody saying somewhere, oh, well, if there's a man saying this, then obviously treat him with sensitivity as well. And the only people to whom it makes any difference at all are literally Daily Mail headline writers.
Let us not deny there is such a thing as the midlife crisis, which is an entirely different...
And how would you want to be treated at work if you were going through...
might manifest themselves in a similar way. But to say that it's the menopause, and it's not just one or two either, it is dozens, and I don't think they've made it up.
Listen, it's going to be like a footnote in a manual that nobody reads. That's the thing, isn't it? It's like nobody... I mean, if you could find me one person in the country who's actually been to their HR...
We'll look for them in the break.
You will find it on Twitter before the end of the show.
We'll look for them in the break, but we're going to throw to the weather now and see what that's going to do to us.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend is set to be unseasonably warm in the south. However, very heavy and persistent rain across Scotland may lead to flooding and travel disruption. The Met Office has issued amber and yellow weather warnings for the heavy and slow-moving rain that will linger through to Sunday morning. The heaviest, most disruptive rain is expected in western and central Scotland. It will be a wet start on Saturday for much of Scotland, with heavy and persistent rain in the west. Otherwise, it will be largely fine and dry, with some mist or fog patches. Once early mist lifts, the bulk of England, Wales, Ireland and Northern Ireland will be fine, dry and sunny, with temperatures 5 to 10 degrees above average. But the rain will continue for much of Scotland. The rain will be very heavy and persistent, with 150 millimetres or 6 inches possible over western hills.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.